In the mid-19th century, Richard Wagner commissioned the bass trumpet to be invented for his ring cycle of operas, and he wrote extensively for that instrument in those and in some other places. These were a different kind of animal from the low F or orchestral trumpets that had existed, in that they had large bores and the tubing was about the length of a trombone that was wrapped up and put valves on so it would sit in the low register. And people who knew about this included Russian orchestral players and Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, who was a very ambitious composer in his day, and he wrote a lot of operas, and he knew about the E-flat bass trumpet, which is a fourth above like a B-flat euphonium sound. And he got an idea, maybe directly from that he wanted an alto trumpet, not just a higher bass trumpet with a big bore, but he wanted something that was a true alto. It had the bore in between a trombone and a soprano trumpet, or a cornet, which was common at the time. In his treatise on orchestration, he claims to have invented such an instrument that he called, conversely, an alto trumpet, or in the parts that he wrote in his pieces for the instrument, a contralto trumpet. And the key of that instrument was F, the same transposing key that most French horn parts are in today. What he wanted was something that was clear and brighter than a bass trumpet and full. He wanted something that had the directness and the core and expressive capability of a soprano trumpet, but down in the altos to fill out the section. The same trees, he also claimed to have invented high trumpets in E flat and D, but there's some confusion about that. And similarly, I don't really believe that he did invent the alto trumpet. I am really convinced of this because I know he didn't really make instruments. That wasn't what he did. He wasn't an engineer. He was a naval officer. But also, I can't confirm it one way or another because there's almost no information on what this instrument actually was. So after Korsakov either invented this instrument or commissioned that it be made, he wrote parts for it into his operas, like there's music from Lada, into Tale of the City of Kitezh, Maid of Sokolov, Night on Mount Triglav, Golden Cockerel. These all have these parts for contralto trumpet in F. Now, he knew that this was a new instrument and it was not going to be easy to find, and so he purposefully wrote the parts so a B-flat trumpet could cover all the notes. So these parts don't go very low. And maybe because of that, partially, the instrument didn't catch on very much with other Russian composers or outside of the country. There were a few other pieces that called for contralto in F. His students, Alexander Glazunov and Igor Stravinsky, both wrote parts for it. Glazunov much more. He wrote into his Eighth Symphony, the paraphrase for the themes of the Allies, World War I era piece, a couple other things. Rachmaninoff, another student of his, wrote the instrument into his Third Symphony, and Shostakovich wrote it into his First Symphony. And again, all of these pieces are high up enough that a B-flat trumpet could cover it if the F alto was not available. Now, after that, almost all usage of it died out. It's just not used at all outside of these Russian pieces. I'm not really sure why it never caught on. But again, I can't really confirm or deny that what it did, because I've done a lot of research into this. I've gotten very interested in the alto trumpet, and there is just nothing. There is nothing about who made these, how many there were, what mouthpiece it used, how it was wrapped. We had rotor valves or pistons. Did anybody use them? There's nothing. It's just a big void. And this is in brass history, where people know every single tiny little thing about Kahn musical instruments, or Victor Mahilian, or any of the other, Boston Musical Instrument Company. It doesn't matter what. Everybody's got everything. There's a lot of hyper nerd activity going on, and there's nothing. I've asked many people; they don't know a damn thing about the original alto trumpet. So what are we to do with this? It's, again, because the parts were written high, you could just play them all on B flat, which is what everybody does. But are there attempts to make the alto trumpet after that? And there have been a few. Bach made an alto trumpet in F and in E flat. You had to special order the E flat one, but the F one was just on offer in very small numbers from about the mid-1930s into about the year 2000. If you can find one of these, they are very, very expensive. And that's a big if on finding, because they are rarer than hen's teeth. It's easier to get sarrusophones than these things, and chimbassos. That should tell you something. There are a few other scattered attempts, but it also seems like people have had to have them custom made. For example, the Los Angeles Brass Quintet, they wanted to do concerts on all trumpets as a gag. If you're not really in the memory space of it, brass quintet, typically it's 2 trumpets, French horn, trombone, and either a tuba or a bass trombone. So to get these trumpets for the horn and for the tuba, they had to have them custom built. Roger Bobo, the tuba player, he had already custom built stuff, and so he commissioned someone to make him a contrabass trumpet in F. Now, there has never been one of those on offer from any company. So the one he had was like made from parts or something. I've seen pictures of it. It's this ridiculous wrapped up beast. Maybe somebody can make it again. I don't know. The alto trumpet that they made, I can't remember the player it was made for or who made it. But again, it was a custom job. And these people, they had money. They could probably have gotten one of the Bach ones if it was available. So this should probably be a sign that those Bachs are really, really hard to find. The other examples I've heard of were made for marching bands. And Holton and Olds both made alto voice trumpets for marching bands. However, those were in E flat, so it's the same range as one of those German E flat bass trumpets. You can still get those German ones if you fly to Germany, because they're used in beer hall bands. What they like to do now is have rotary trumpets, soprano, alto, bass, and a tuba, and they do polkas and waltzes and stuff on that. So, but if you want one in F, you want to be really true to Rimsky-Korsakov's vision and the vision of these players. I'm not really sure what the options are except for these few scattered things. The good news for me, though, is that I did find one for sale. I had mentioned to a friend that I was really interested in one of these. It was still on my list. And I got to borrow one of these many years ago to play The Rite of Spring and Rachmaninoff 3 on the same concert. A colleague had one that could be put into F and into E flat, and he lent it to me for that show. So I got to play Rachmaninoff 3 on alto trumpet, which was very cool. Almost no one does that. And with the same horn, I could do the trumpet 4-part from Rite of Spring, where it goes to bass trumpet at the end. So it was really, really neat experience. And it seemed from him that he was not going to sell that to me, and he wanted too much money. But then the same model came up for sale, and it was affordable and intact, and I bought it, and I'm going to show it to you today. This is the Getzen 300 alto trumpet. Do not adjust your set. This is really that long. It's actually difficult for me to fit it into the frame when I'm this close to the camera. As you can see, rather than come up with some sort of different wrap or alternative way of making a big trumpet, they decided to just literally make their student trumpet, the 300 trumpet, bigger. Getzen 300 was a very popular student trumpet. They thought, well, people like that. Why won't they like it gigantic? And it's not the worst idea in the world. But I have some comments. Just for reference, if you can't tell, I'm going to hold it up to these trumpets behind me. Bam! Look at that thing. I was taking photos of this when I had it earlier, back years ago, and people were like, wow, that's a big trumpet. So, it looks like a normal trumpet. Seems all right. Sturdy instrument. This was made for marching bands. They had this idea of having, trumpet choirs to cover stuff so you could be really with everything. They have a high E-flat D trumpet that was part of this series. I also have that one. That's actually not a bad E-flat D if you find it. It's got some intonation issues and the lowest notes don't center correctly. And if you want a real brilliant high tone, it's, not a bad option. This instrument has some stuff with it, though, which I need to talk about. So, if you look up images of the Bach alto trumpet, you'll see that they wanted to get ergonomics out of the way. So they had the tuning slide like this, like a cornet. Modern cornets, the long cornets, they have this sort of wrap, which will conserve space and make it a little more round, but also not get in the way too much. They could have done that with this, but they didn't do that. I think part of it was for the visual. If you're on a marching band field and you're in formations, it looks real cool to wave this thing around. You can do up, down, whatever. It's a big effect. I totally understand that. I can respect that. The problem is with the weight of the thing and the balance. Because when you get this big, you got a lot on this end and you got even more on this end. And so it wants to tip down like that, and it takes a little bit to get used to it. This actually isn't as heavy as you might think it is. It's really not that much of a problem to deal with. But it doesn't help if you want to conserve on space. If you're, say, in an orchestra and you got to do this, you got to just set your stand back, or you got to put it on the side, which I really don't like doing, or you got to go under. It's really kind of a problem. And this is a problem if you play in pits with a trumpet. You just cannot take away that horizontal real estate. It's not what we're used to do. So that's one comment. Now, the other thing I will say about the fact they didn't redesign this is that it's a sign that they didn't probably take this instrument very seriously. They thought it wouldn't sell very much, and so they did a real bare-bones solution to making an alto trumpet. They just blew up the normal trumpet. They made a few adjustments so you could take a trumpet shank. But they didn't include some things which are probably really useful. There's no way to adjust this third slide. This is something I'm going to have to go to my tech and figure out how to deal with. In fact, this is so far away, you can't just solder a ring on it. You'd have to do some reversing's or have a big trigger or whatever. There's also nothing on this side. And those are really important, partially because this has some serious intonation problems. They're not the worst, and this is not nearly as bad as what I've heard from the Frumpet, an instrument that Getzen made that is atrocious, and this should not be confused with. So it's not as bad as that, but I think a big part of it comes from this bell flare. I'm not a physicist, but if you take this, I've got my B flat here as a Schilke, and if you look at these flares, it just gets more conical quicker on this one. The problem with that high E flat D trumpet from them is that they didn't do the bell flare right. This is what I've been told, at least. And so that's why the intonation has problems. And I'm guessing that contributed a lot to this. Another sign that they may not have taken this very seriously is that, as far as I know, this did not come with a mouthpiece. The shank here, it fits a standard trumpet receiver. You do not want to play normal trumpet on this. It is going to be screamingly loud, and the range is all wrong. You also don't want to do what they suggest, which is take the included French horn adapter and stick it in there and put a French horn mouthpiece in it, because French horn mouthpieces are really small because they're for instruments that start with real small pipes and are dramatically conical. This is not dramatically conical. This is a cylindrical instrument. The width stays the same through most of the body, and then it starts to get big around there. So I don't know what would be the best thing to play with this. The Bachs, those alto trumpets, those had the alto trumpet mouthpieces. Bach made the 9AT specifically for that. I'm pretty sure that's what I played on when I borrowed this ahead of time, and that worked really well. But I had to do a bunch of experimentation to find the mouthpiece that I like the best on it. The best thing I've got right now is this Rudy Mueck custom or cushion rim 32C. It's, I believe, an old alto horn mouthpiece or alto trombone mouthpiece. I got it with an antique alto horn. I don't know much about it. But with just a little bit of tape on there so it fits in nicely, it seems to work really well. It gives it a core, and it solves a couple of the intonation problems that I was having. And it also, I can make it sound like a trumpet. So what does this sound like, you're probably wondering? Well, I've got it in front of me one of those contralto trumpet parts from the orchestral. I've got the Rachmaninoff 3 part in front of me. And I'm just going to do a little taster test. I'm going to play that on B flat, which is what most people are used to hearing, and then I'm going to play it on the alto. Just a little bit of it. So perfectly respectable. It's not supposed to be very loud, but it's going to have a different quality when I play it on this lower instrument. So, deeper, more horn-like, but still with that trumpety edge, and it's more urgent and in some ways more lyrical because it's higher up in the instrument's range. And that makes a difference. That's what Rimsky-Korsakov wanted, and presumably what all these other composers wanted. If they didn't want that, they wouldn't have written these contralto parts. They would have just written trumpet 3 for a soprano. So I'm thinking there is a lot of potential for alto trumpet. And you may not have thought that just from that little bit that I played. But there should be a new one of these on offer, I think. There's no impetus in the market to do that because, again, all these parts were written high enough you could just cover them on something else. That's not true with all those bass trumpet parts that Wagner and Strauss wrote for. They use the whole range, including all the low stuff, so you got to have one of those horns. And also, those are still manufactured already for something else, so they have a place. This doesn't have a place. I think that's a shame. I would like to see a new one of these on offer. It's enough that in my craw that I am thinking of actually contacting people who do custom jobs and who are interested in the science of brass manufacturing, just to get a sense of what would it take to make a new one of these. You know, we live in the era of Wessex and other companies that can reproduce old instruments. I saw there was a guy who was reproducing stuff from the Boston Musical Instrument Company just out of the catalog illustrations. So we've got a lot of new tools. But in order to do that, we would need to have an example of what the original one was. And those are all gone. I actually think that maybe they melted them all down because in the 1930s when these cut off, you know, we're getting close to the Great Patriotic War in the Soviet Union, and they needed all the metal they could get. Apparently, Japan melted down all their student-grade instruments in World War II just for the metal. So maybe they thought, we've only got a few of these weird F trumpets, and people aren't writing very much for them. Let's just get rid of them. So they into the lava pit they go, and then there's more bullets. That could have happened. Maybe there's just the politics between the U.S. and Russia are so poor that no information is flowing over there. If you know what's the deal, please let me know, because it'd be great to locate one of these things or even just to see a picture so I know what it is. But in the meantime, we can just come up with new ones. There's the box around. We could try copying that. We could, you know, try to get some specs out of this if you wanted something more fanfare-y. There's those fanfare or herald trumpets that are custom built for like the U.S. Army Band, and Hawks makes those for those. They probably have some knowledge that they could offer on this. But you know, another thing you can do is just, if you have one of these, just play as much music on it as possible. Make a case publicly for this being an instrument worth playing, because we have very, very little evidence of that. We have very few recordings. We have, you know, very little impetus just in the natural market to do it. But there's potential. It's a very interesting instrument. This is better than it could be, and I actually really like playing this one. It's very fun. It's easy blowing. The valves are really good, you know, and you can really rip on it if you want. So it's going to appear in some experimental music in the future or what's it kind of things. What I'm also going to do is try to play all the most interesting parts out of these orchestral contralto parts for you on YouTube, so you can hear what the composers originally intended for those parts. Maybe no one has ever heard those parts on this kind of instrument. So that's going to be an upcoming video series. I'm really looking forward to that. I have a little bit of practicing to do. In the meantime, I just wanted to show you what this was and what it could do and the problems with trying to get one, and just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste before I dive in. So I'm going to end with the end of that Rachmaninoff part that I was playing.